It was a gray afternoon when Rachel stood in the doorway of their new house, staring at the sprawling woods that stretched out in front of her. The house, nestled at the edge of a sleepy rural town, was supposed to be a fresh start. She hoped the quiet would be healing for both her and her son, Owen. But deep down, she knew she was merely running from memories, from pain, from a life that had been violently stolen from them. She had lost her husband in a car accident, a loss that shattered their world, and it seemed as though Owen had lost something much deeper. Since the day of the crash, Owen hadn't said a single word. No tears, no tantrums, just an eerie silence that settled around him like a second skin. The boy who used to sing along to his favorite songs, who had an endless collection of silly jokes, was gone. In his place was a hollow shell, a child who didn't react to the world, nor did he engage with it. He lived in a constant fog, eyes distant, shoulders slumped, as though he were caught in the grips of an endless nightmare. Rachel had tried everything she could think of: counseling, support groups, even medication, but nothing seemed to break the silence. It was as if Owen had shut himself off from everything, including her. At night, she would hear him sobbing quietly in his room, but when she went to check on him, he would say nothing. He had locked his grief deep inside, unable or unwilling to share it. The boy who had once been her joy, or her reason for fighting through each day, was now a ghost in their house. They moved to the rural town in a desperate attempt to escape the reminders of the life they had once shared. Perhaps the quiet would allow Owen to heal, to find his voice again. But Rachel wasn't sure anymore. Was it too late? Was her son lost forever in a world of silence and sorrow? The day they arrived, Owen didn't seem to care about the new surroundings. He barely reacted as Rachel unloaded boxes from the car, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, his gaze absent. She called out to him, trying to catch his attention, but he didn't respond. He simply stood there, staring off into space. It was as though the new house, the new town, had no meaning for him. "Let's take a walk, Owen. Get some fresh air," Rachel suggested, trying to coax him out of his shell. Owen didn't answer, but he followed her anyway. They wandered along the edge of the woods, where the trees seemed to whisper in the wind and the air was thick with the scent of pine. Rachel hoped the serenity of the place would help Owen find a sense of peace. But as they walked, something strange happened. Owen stopped, his gaze fixed on something in the woods. Rachel looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just trees, and the long stretch of winding trail that led deeper into the forest, but Owen's eyes were wide, almost panicked. Without a word, he took off running. "Owen!" Rachel called out, startled. "Come back here!" But Owen didn't hear her. He ran with a wild desperation, faster than she could keep up. Rachel's heart raced as she followed, calling his name, but it was no use. Owen was already too far into the woods, disappearing between the trees. She pushed through the underbrush, the sharp twigs catching at her skin, fear clutching at her chest. It wasn't until Rachel was nearly out of breath that she heard it. The sound of Owen's voice. A sharp cry echoed through the woods, followed by a low growl. Her heart skipped a beat. She pushed forward, ignoring the pain in her legs, driven only by the fear of what she might find. When she finally reached the clearing where Owen had stopped, she saw him, crouched down beside something, a small, trembling figure, huddled close to him. It was a dog. A large, scruffy German shepherd, its muzzle tightly taped shut, its fur matted and filthy, its body marked with deep, ugly scars. The dog was shaking, its eyes wide with terror, but there was something else in them, something that stopped Rachel in her tracks. The dog wasn't just afraid, it was broken. And there was Owen, crouched beside it, his hand resting on the dog's side, offering a silent comfort, as if he could sense its pain. The bond between them was immediate, unspoken, but powerful. Rachel stood there for a long moment, unable to move, her heart torn between the urgency of the situation and the strange pull she felt watching the two of them. Owen hadn't spoken in almost a year, yet here he was, reaching out to this creature as though they were both trapped in the same kind of silence. "Owen," Rachel said softly, approaching him cautiously. "What's going on? Are you okay?" But Owen didn't answer. He simply stayed where he was, his fingers gently brushing the dog's fur. Rachel knelt beside him, carefully touching the injured dog. She could feel its ribs, sharp under its fur, its body trembling beneath her hand. She had to get help. "Stay with him, Owen," Rachel said, her voice cracking. "I'm going to get help." As she ran back toward the house, her thoughts raced. What had happened to this dog? Why was it out here in such a state? And why had Owen, of all people, found it? The storm came out of nowhere. Rachel hadn't expected it to hit so suddenly. One moment the sky had been a pale blue, the afternoon sun filtering softly through the trees. But within minutes, the clouds had darkened, and the wind had picked up with a ferocity that startled her. She could feel the air growing heavier, pressing down on her chest as she ran back to the woods. The storm was now a violent force, the sky crackling with thunder and lightning. Rachel had never been one to fear storms, but as the thunder rumbled in the distance, she could feel something strange, a sense of urgency, of impending danger. She quickened her pace, hoping she could make it back to Owen and the dog before the worst of the storm hit. She was almost there when the first bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. It felt like the earth itself shook. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze, as if nature was holding its breath. When Rachel finally reached the clearing, her heart sank at the sight that met her. Owen was still there, crouched by the injured German shepherd, his hand still resting on the dog's side. The dog looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes, but it was clear that its injuries were more severe than she had originally thought. Its body was covered in gashes and bruises, as though it had been beaten repeatedly. The tape on its muzzle was frayed, almost as if someone had tried to silence it completely. "Owen!" Rachel called, her voice trembling. "We need to get him to the vet. He's hurt. We can't leave him here." But Owen didn't react. He continued to stare at the dog, his fingers tracing the outline of the dog's ribs, his gaze soft, almost soothing. Rachel's heart broke as she watched him. It was the first time she had seen him show any kind of emotion in months, something deep and raw, a quiet tenderness that she hadn't thought he was capable of. "I'll be back," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just stay here with him. I'll get the car." Rachel's mind raced as she made her way back toward the house, her steps quick but careful in the growing storm. The wind howled in her ears, the trees bending and creaking under the pressure of the storm. She felt the first raindrops hit her face, cold and stinging, but she barely noticed them as she focused solely on getting Owen the help he needed. By the time she returned, drenched to the bone, Owen was still sitting beside the dog. He hadn't moved an inch. The storm was now in full force, the rain pouring down in sheets, but Owen stayed as still as ever. Rachel didn't know if it was the storm that had made him so still, or if it was the bond he had formed with the dog. Either way, it didn't matter. She needed to act fast. "Let's go," she urged gently, kneeling beside Owen. "We need to get him to the vet now." It took some effort to lift the dog, but with Owen's help, they managed to get him into the back of the car. The dog didn't make a sound, its body limp and fragile. Rachel glanced back at Owen, who had his hand resting gently on the dog's side, as though trying to reassure it that it wasn't alone. The drive to the vet felt like a blur. The storm outside was relentless, the rain pounding against the windshield, the wipers working overtime to keep up with the downpour. Rachel couldn't focus on anything except the dog in the back seat and the quiet, strange connection between Owen and the animal. When they finally arrived at the vet's office, Rachel didn't even wait for the staff to open the door. She rushed in, breathless, clutching the dog in her arms. The receptionist looked up, startled, but before she could speak, Rachel was already on her way to the examination room. Owen, Rachel called, looking back at her son, who was standing frozen at the entrance of the room. Stay with him? I'm going to get help. Owen didn't respond, but he followed her anyway, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't look at her, didn't say anything. It was as if he were in a trance, completely focused on the dog. The vet came in quickly, his brow furrowed as he examined the dog's wounds. He clicked his tongue in disbelief as he traced his fingers along the dog's ribs, gently prodding at the swollen areas of its body. This poor thing, the vet muttered. It's been through hell. And these implants? His voice trailed off as he examined the strange metallic devices embedded in the dog's body. I've never seen anything like this before. Rachel's stomach twisted. What do you mean? What's wrong with him? The vet looked up at her, his face grim. I think this dog has been through something far worse than just abuse. These implants, they're surgical. This dog was likely part of some kind of experiment. It's hard to say for sure, but whoever did this to him wasn't just hurting him. They were using him. Rachel's mind spun. The words didn't make sense. Who would do such a thing to an animal? And why? Is he going to make it? She asked, her voice trembling. The vet hesitated before answering. I can't say. His injuries are severe, and there's significant trauma to his body, but we'll do everything we can. As the vet worked, Rachel sat in the waiting room, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and confusion. She watched Owen through the glass window, still sitting beside the dog's bed, his hand resting gently on its side. He hadn't spoken a word. But for the first time in a long while, Rachel thought she saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The boy who had been silent for so long was showing emotion again, and for some reason it seemed like the dog, this broken, abused creature, was the key to bringing Owen back to life. The night passed slowly, the air thick with tension as Rachel sat in the waiting room, her eyes flickering between the clock on the wall and the door to the examination room. Owen had barely moved, his posture rigid, his fingers still gently resting on the injured German shepherd's side. His silence was unnerving, but it also told Rachel something more. The bond between the two was undeniable, and despite his own internal turmoil, Owen was fully committed to helping this dog, even if he couldn't yet find his own way to heal. Around midnight, the vet finally emerged, his face grave. The dark circles under his eyes told Rachel that he had been working nonstop, doing his best to save the dog. She stood up quickly, her heart pounding. Is he okay? She asked, her voice betraying her worry. The vet exhaled heavily, glancing down at his notes. It's a miracle he's still alive. His injuries, they're extensive, and the surgery, well, it's not something we typically see in animals. He's got multiple wounds from blunt trauma. And these, he said, lifting his hand to indicate the strange surgical implants beneath the dog's fur, are unlike anything I've encountered. They seem like they were implanted to control him. Possibly a form of neural control? Rachel blinked, trying to process his words. Neural control? The thought was horrifying. She couldn't fathom how or why anyone would do such a thing to an animal. What do you mean? Neural control. The vet rubbed his temples, looking more tired than ever. The implants are similar to devices used in military projects. Things I'm not at liberty to discuss fully, but they're meant to link a subject's nervous system to an external controller. Essentially, it's a form of remote control. Rachel's blood ran cold. The dog wasn't just abused, it had been experimented on. It had been used, tortured, and controlled as if it were nothing more than a tool. And somehow Owen had found him, saved him, when the world had written both of them off as expendable. But he's stable now? Rachel asked, trying to focus on the here and now. For the most part, the vet answered. We've stabilized him for the night. He's sedated, but he's still in critical condition. I don't know if he'll ever fully recover from what was done to him, but we'll try. Rachel's mind raced, but she nodded. Thank you. And What about the tattoo? The vet raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her question. Tattoo? I didn't notice. On his side, Rachel pressed, her voice tightening. It says, Echo. The vet nodded slowly. I'll have to check again, but if there's a tattoo like that, it could be a marking from the lab, a form of identification. Whatever happened to this dog, it wasn't just an isolated case of abuse. This was systematic, organized cruelty. Rachel's hands trembled as she turned toward Owen, still sitting by the dog's side. His hand was curled around the dog's paw, his expression soft, almost protective. She could see the faintest glimmer of something in his eyes, a sense of connection. She hadn't seen that in him in months. Owen was finally engaging with the dog, and in some way, with the world again. But there were still too many unanswered questions. How had this dog ended up here? And why had Owen, of all people, found him? It felt like more than just coincidence. It felt like fate, or something darker, like the two of them were bound together in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Rachel sat down beside Owen, brushing a lock of wet hair out of his face. Owen, she whispered, hoping for some sign of acknowledgement. Do you understand what's happening? Owen didn't speak, but his gaze flicked up to meet her eyes. And for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something. A recognition, an unspoken bond between them. The vet interrupted her thoughts, stepping toward the door. I'll let you be with him for now. He's in good hands. But be prepared. His recovery is going to take time, and there may be complications. Rachel nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She watched the vet leave, and then turned back to Owen and the dog. The room felt colder now, despite the warmth of the hospital lights. The sterile, clinical environment only seemed to amplify the pain that lingered in the air. She glanced down at the dog again, studying his worn face. His fur was matted with dirt and dried blood, and his ribs were clearly visible beneath the torn remnants of his fur. His muzzle, once tightly taped, had been removed, but there was an eerie silence to his expression. He wasn't like the other dogs she had known. He was something more, something dangerous, something broken. But there was also a flicker of something else, something Rachel couldn't quite put into words. Echo. That tattoo had seemed almost prophetic, a mark of identity, a silent cry for help. It felt as though Echo was trying to tell them something they hadn't yet understood. His very name seemed to echo through Rachel's mind, carrying with it the weight of a history that hadn't been fully told. Rachel sat beside Owen, her eyes focused on the dog, as she whispered, We'll figure this out. I promise. Owen shifted slightly, his eyes never leaving Echo. His lips moved almost imperceptibly, and for the first time in almost a year, he spoke. He's scared. Rachel felt her heart tighten. Owen had never said a word like that before. It wasn't just a statement. It was a recognition, a reflection of something inside him. The way Owen was connecting with Echo, understanding him in a way that words couldn't explain, was something she couldn't ignore. In that moment, Rachel realized that whatever happened to Echo, whatever trauma the dog had endured, was not unlike the darkness that had taken hold of Owen. They were two broken souls, connected by a pain so deep that it transcended words. And perhaps, just perhaps, they had found each other for a reason. The days after the storm were a blur of strange routines. The small town where Rachel and Owen had moved felt even quieter now, with the chaos of the storm replaced by an eerie stillness. The quiet had always been a double-edged sword for Owen. On one hand, it gave him space, a solitude in which to exist without being pushed into conversations or social obligations. But it also allowed his grief to fester, to grow, unchecked. But there was something different now. Owen had not spoken a word in nearly a year, not since the day of his father's death. No amount of coaxing or therapy had helped him find his voice, but in the presence of this injured dog, something seemed to shift. It wasn't immediate, But Rachel began to notice small changes. The way Owen would gently touch the dog's side when he thought no one was looking. The subtle way he began to feed Echo, his hands trembling at first but eventually steadying. Each time he did something for Echo, Owen seemed to become more present, more connected to the world around him. Rachel couldn't deny it any longer. Owen was slowly coming back to life. Echo, despite his broken body, was helping him heal in ways Rachel had never imagined. It was as if this dog, who had been through unimaginable suffering, was teaching Owen how to reconnect, how to trust again. One evening, after dinner, Rachel sat on the couch while Owen sat on the floor beside Echo's bed, his eyes fixed on the dog. The storm had passed, but the rain continued to fall, a soft pattering against the windows. The air felt heavy with the weight of unspoken words, but Rachel didn't push. Instead, she simply watched as Owen carefully ran his fingers over the dog's fur, his expression thoughtful, as though searching for something deeper within the creature. "Do you think he's going to be okay?" Rachel asked softly, her voice breaking the stillness. Owen didn't answer right away, his gaze never leaving Echo. The dog, though still weak and fragile, was looking more alive than he had just days ago. The bruises were beginning to fade, the wounds on his body slowly healing under the care of the vet. The strange metallic implants that had been discovered in his body were still a mystery, but Echo's survival felt like a small miracle. "He's scared," Owen whispered, his voice barely audible, the words coming out strained, as though it took every ounce of strength for him to speak. Rachel froze. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. Owen had spoken, not just a whisper, but words, actual words. "What did you say?" Rachel asked, her heart leaping in her chest. Owen turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. They were still haunted, still distant. But there was something else in them now. An emotion, a flicker of recognition. "He's scared," Owen repeated, his voice stronger this time. "Like me." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She had expected a breakthrough, a moment where Owen would speak, but she hadn't expected it to be so raw, so full of feeling. It was as though Owen had finally found his voice, and it came out in the most vulnerable, honest way possible. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sadness. Owen was scared, just like Echo. He had been living in fear, in silence, for so long, but now there was a glimmer of hope. He was starting to share his pain, starting to face it, and Echo, with his own trauma, was the key to unlocking that door. "That's right," Rachel said softly, kneeling beside Owen. "He's scared. But we're here for him, just like he's here for you." Owen didn't respond, but his hand found Echo's again, resting gently on the dog's side. The bond between them was undeniable. It wasn't just the bond of caretaker and pet. It was something much deeper. They were two broken souls who had found each other in a world that had abandoned them. And together, they were beginning to heal, piece by piece. Over the following weeks, Rachel watched as Owen's emotional walls began to crumble. He still wasn't the boy he once was, the carefree child who had loved to laugh and play, but he was no longer the hollow shell he had been. With Echo by his side, Owen began to express himself again, not in grand speeches or declarations, but in small, simple ways. A smile here, a gentle touch there, a quiet nod when Rachel asked how he was feeling. It was as though Echo had given him permission to feel again, to experience the world in a way he hadn't been able to since his father's death. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Rachel watched as Owen sat on the floor, his back against the couch, his legs stretched out. Echo lay beside him, his head resting on Owen's lap, content and at peace. Owen was quietly stroking the dog's fur, his fingers moving in a rhythmic pattern as though they were communicating without words. Rachel could see the change in Owen's eyes. The distance that had once defined him was starting to fade. His expression, though still cautious, was softer now, less guarded. The void that had consumed him for so long was slowly being filled, not with words or actions, but with something more important: connection. It was then that Rachel realized something profound. It wasn't just that Echo was helping Owen heal, it was that the dog, in his own quiet way, was teaching Owen that it was okay to be broken, that it was okay to be afraid, and that healing didn't require perfection. It only required the willingness to try again, to reach out, and to trust, even when it seemed impossible. "Do you want to go for a walk tomorrow?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle. Owen's eyes flicked up to meet hers. For a moment he didn't respond, his gaze distant once more. But then, just as Rachel was about to give up on the conversation, he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I'd like that." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time in months that Owen had willingly agreed to leave the house, to step outside, to face the world again. And in that small moment, Rachel realized that the most miraculous thing wasn't just that Echo had survived, it was that Owen was starting to come back to life. Rachel had spent days thinking about the dog's injuries and the strange surgical implants that had been found embedded in his body. Every time she tried to push it from her mind, it crept back into her thoughts, gnawing at her with relentless persistence. She couldn't shake the feeling that Echo's past was darker than she could imagine, that this was more than just a case of animal abuse. There was something bigger, something more sinister at play, and she had to uncover the truth. She decided to dig deeper. The first place she went was the local library, hoping to find some kind of clue or record that might explain the origins of Echo's suffering. The library was small but welcoming, filled with dusty shelves stacked high with books. Rachel hadn't been in a library for years, but there was something calming about the quiet, the rustling of pages, and the sense that someone, somewhere, had already searched for answers long before she ever came here. Rachel sat at a table in the back, surrounded by a stack of books on military experiments, covert operations, and animal rights violations. She had no real leads, but she couldn't ignore the suspicion that Echo's past was tied to something much larger than a simple case of cruelty. Her mind kept returning to the dog's tattoo, Echo, and the implants, which seemed so out of place for any ordinary animal. She spent hours flipping through old records, journals, and news clippings until her eyes landed on a story that seemed too coincidental to ignore. The headline read, "Whistleblower reveals secret military animal experimentation program." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, scanning the article with urgency. The article described a former military technician who had blown the whistle on a covert government project known as Operation Orion. According to the article, Operation Orion had been a top-secret program that used animals, primarily dogs, in experimental tests. The goal was to create a new form of neural-controlled soldiers, animals that could be controlled remotely, used for military purposes in extreme situations. The article was vague, but it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. The animals involved in the program were subjected to extreme abuse, undergoing invasive surgeries to implant tracking devices, chips, and neural control systems that linked their nervous systems to remote operators. It was a chilling revelation, and Rachel could hardly believe what she was reading. The thought that Echo had been part of such a program was terrifying, but it made a horrible kind of sense. Echo's injuries, the strange implants in his name, Echo, all seemed to fit this dark narrative. He wasn't just a victim of neglect or abuse. He had been a weapon, a tool used by a shadowy government operation. Echo had been transformed into something unrecognizable, a creature whose will had been broken, whose very identity had been erased. The article mentioned that the program had been shut down several years ago after multiple public scandals, but many of the animals involved had disappeared, their fates unknown. Rachel felt her chest tighten as she read the last lines of the article. The whistleblower had been given a new identity and had gone into hiding, but there were still many unanswered questions about the true scale of Operation Orion and the lives it had destroyed. Rachel sat back, staring at the article in disbelief. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Echo wasn't just a dog in need of saving. He was a symbol of something far more insidious. And somehow, Owen had found him. But why? How had Echo ended up in this remote town, so far from the The dark laboratories where he had been created and abused? Rachel knew she had to take this further. She needed more answers. The next morning, Rachel made a phone call to a contact she had made a few months earlier, a former journalist who had worked on uncovering government corruption and whistleblower cases. She explained everything from Echo's strange implants to the revelations in the article. Her contact listened carefully, then promised to dig into it. As the days passed, Rachel waited anxiously for news. Owen, meanwhile, continued to grow closer to Echo. The dog, though still fragile, was beginning to show more signs of recovery. He was eating more, his fur slowly regrowing in patches, and he seemed more relaxed in Owen's presence. Their bond was undeniable. Owen had found something in Echo, a kind of kinship, a reflection of his own pain, perhaps. The silence that had once consumed Owen seemed to be slowly lifting, as if the dog had given him permission to grieve, to feel, to heal. One evening, as Rachel sat with Owen and Echo in the living room, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her journalist contact. The message simply read, "I found something. Meet me tomorrow." The words were like a shot of adrenaline. Rachel's pulse quickened as she texted back, agreeing to meet the next morning. The information she had uncovered was about to take a new turn. Rachel could feel it. The following morning, she met her contact at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He was a wiry man with graying hair and a wary expression. He motioned for Rachel to sit as he pulled a manila folder from his bag. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where whispers carried a sense of weight, and Rachel's heart raced with anticipation. This is bigger than we thought," her contact said quietly, flipping open the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and official-looking papers. Rachel's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. The documents were classified reports detailing the operations of Operation Orion. There were names, locations, and dates, evidence that confirmed the existence of the program. Some of the names on the papers matched the information Rachel had uncovered in the library. But there was something else, a photograph of a dog, marked with the same tattoo as Echo's. "This is it," her contact said. This dog was part of the program. His name was Echo. He was trained to perform complex tasks, communicate with military personnel, and even be used in tactical operations. He wasn't the only one. There are dozens of other dogs like him, but they were all taken when the program was shut down. Echo is one of the few survivors. Rachel's hands shook as she processed the information. Echo had been part of something far larger than she could have imagined. He wasn't just a broken animal. He was living proof of the horrors that had been inflicted on so many others. "I'm going to expose this," Rachel said, her voice filled with determination. "The world needs to know, and Echo deserves justice." In the days following the meeting with her journalist contact, Rachel felt the weight of her mission settle deeper into her bones. She now knew the truth. Echo wasn't just a casualty of neglect. He was a survivor of a covert government project, subjected to unspeakable experiments. The evidence was mounting, and the truth could no longer be buried. But even as she prepared to expose the operation, she was still grappling with the most pressing question of all. What had been done to Echo that made him so much more than a typical dog? She hadn't expected the next development to come so soon. It started one morning when Rachel and Owen were sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise over the woods. Echo, still fragile but recovering, lay at their feet, his head resting on Owen's lap. Rachel sipped her coffee, lost in thought, when she heard a sudden rustling sound. Echo's ears perked up, his body tensing as though he sensed something out of the ordinary. Owen, sensing his companion's unease, looked down at the dog. "It's okay, Echo," Owen whispered, his voice soothing, though there was an edge of nervousness in his tone. But Echo wasn't calming down. Instead, he shifted to his feet and moved toward the edge of the porch, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. His posture was alert, tense, as though he were tracking something or someone. "Echo?" Rachel called softly. "What is it, boy?" Echo turned back to look at her, his eyes widening, And for the first time since Rachel had known him, she saw something truly remarkable. It wasn't just the intensity of his gaze. It was the way he responded to her words. It was as if he understood her, not just in the way a trained dog would, but in a way that was beyond normal animal behavior. His eyes seemed to say, "I'm trying to protect you." Rachel stood up, instinctively moving closer to Owen. She reached out to Echo, gently placing her hand on his back. He froze, but didn't back down. Instead, he turned and patted down the steps of the porch, moving toward the woods. Owen, stay here," Rachel said, her voice low but firm. "I'm going to check it out." Owen didn't protest. Instead, he watched quietly as his mother followed Echo, who was now walking with an urgency that Rachel hadn't seen before. The dog was no longer limping as he had been just days earlier. His steps were strong, purposeful, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that he was leading her somewhere. As she followed him into the woods, she felt a sense of awe and fear. There was something about Echo, something that felt almost supernatural. They reached a clearing at the edge of the woods. Echo stopped, his body still and focused, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Rachel looked around, but saw nothing at first. She stood still, waiting for a sign of what had drawn Echo to this spot. Then it happened. From the dense thicket of trees, a rustling sound emerged, followed by a low growl that sent a chill through Rachel's spine. Echo's fur bristled as he moved in front of Rachel, standing guard between her and the unseen threat. He was no longer a wounded animal. He was a protector, something else entirely, something with intelligence and instincts that far exceeded any dog Rachel had ever known. She held her breath as the sound drew closer, the growl growing louder. And then, emerging from the trees, a figure appeared, an older man dressed in military fatigues. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the woods with a practiced vigilance. "Echo," the man said, his voice hard and commanding. Rachel took an instinctive step back, her heart racing. There was something wrong about this man, something predatory. The way Echo reacted to him with a low, threatening growl confirmed her suspicion. This man wasn't here to help. He was here to reclaim what was his. Echo stepped forward, positioning himself between the man and Rachel, his posture now fully defensive. He was no longer just an injured animal. He was a sentinel, a creature whose loyalty had been earned, not forced. "I should have known," the man muttered, his gaze locked on Echo. "You were always one of the strong ones. It was only a matter of time before you escaped." Rachel was frozen, her mind scrambling for a way out. The man's words made her heart race. What did he mean by one of the strong ones? Why had Echo been chosen, and why was this man hunting him down? "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The man's eyes flicked to her, sizing her up. He wasn't surprised by her question, but the way he looked at her made Rachel feel small, insignificant. He knew something she didn't, and he wasn't eager to share. "I'm Colonel Beck," he said coldly, "and I'm here to bring Echo back where he belongs." Rachel's stomach sank. Colonel Beck. It was a name she had seen mentioned in the classified documents she had uncovered. He was a contractor for the government, someone who had likely been part of the project that had created Echo. But there was something more dangerous about him now, something Rachel couldn't quite place. "You can't take him," Rachel said, her voice shaking but firm. "He's not a weapon anymore. He's a living being." Colonel Beck's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. "He's classified property," he replied, his voice low with authority. "And I'm here to make sure he stays that way." Echo growled again, his body trembling with tension. Rachel could see the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't fear for himself. It was fear for her. It was a warning. In that moment, Rachel realized the full extent of Echo's capabilities. This wasn't just a dog. This was a sentient being, trained to survive and to think. Echo wasn't just responding to commands. He was making decisions, analyzing threats, and protecting the ones he cared about. The intelligence behind his actions was beyond belief. Rachel took a deep breath, her mind racing. She couldn't let Colonel Beck take Echo. She couldn't let anyone take him. Not after everything they had been through together. Echo had been more than just an animal to Owen and her. He had been a lifeline, a bridge back to a world that Owen had thought he had lost forever. "You'll have to go through me first," Rachel said, her voice trembling with determination. Beck's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. The standoff was silent, a battle of wills. It was clear that this was far from over, and Rachel realized that Echo's past was about to catch up to him in a way none of them were prepared for. Rachel could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Colonel Beck's presence was suffocating, his every movement calculated and precise, like a predator closing in on its prey. Echo's low growl was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. But even that was muted by the force of Beck's gaze. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine, the fear rising like bile in her throat. She knew this man and his cold demeanor meant trouble. Echo was no longer just a victim of Operation Orion. He was a fugitive, and Colonel Beck was here to bring him back. Rachel took a steadying breath, trying to remain calm as she stood her ground. She could feel Echo's eyes on her, and for the first time, she understood just how deeply their bond had grown. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was her partner, her protector, and if she had to fight to keep him, then that's what she would do. Beck's lips curled into a smirk, as if he could sense the determination in her. "You really think you can stop me?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're nothing more than a civilian. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I'm not going to let you take him." "Don't make me do this," Beck said, stepping forward, his hand slowly reaching into his jacket. Rachel's pulse quickened, her eyes darting to his movements. Was he armed? What was he planning? Before she could react, Echo suddenly lunged forward with incredible speed, his teeth bared in a protective snarl. He wasn't going to let Beck get any closer to Rachel, not while she was standing her ground. The military-trained instincts inside him had kicked in, and he was ready to defend her at all costs. "Echo, stop!" Rachel called, her voice sharp and commanding. But it was too late. The dog had already positioned himself between her and Beck, blocking his path, his body tense and ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. Beck froze, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "You don't know what you're doing, Rachel," he said, his tone colder now, tinged with anger. "This animal was never meant to be free. He was created to serve a higher purpose. And you," he paused, shaking his head, "you've only made things more complicated than they need to be." Rachel's thoughts raced as she tried to think of a way out of this. She couldn't let Echo be taken back to that lab, not after everything they had been through together, not when she had just begun to understand what he truly was. And she couldn't let Owen see Echo taken away from him again. "Please, Colonel," Rachel said, her voice steady but pleading. "He's not a weapon anymore. He's a living being, and he has a right to his freedom. You can't just take him because he was part of some experiment." Beck's eyes flicked to Echo, then back to Rachel. "Freedom?" he scoffed. "You think freedom is what he wants? You think he can choose what he wants after everything that's been done to him? He's been trained to obey commands, to serve a purpose. That's all he knows." Rachel shook her head, her heart heavy with grief. "You're wrong. He's more than that. He's more than just an obedient tool." Echo's eyes never left Beck's, his body still positioned between Rachel and the Colonel. He was waiting for her signal, waiting for her to give him the order. His loyalty was unwavering, his trust in her absolute. And in that moment, Rachel understood something profound. Echo wasn't just protecting her from Beck. He was protecting her from the past that still loomed over them, from the dark shadow of Operation Orion that would stop at nothing to reclaim him. I'm not letting you take him, Rachel said firmly. Not without a fight. Beck's gaze hardened, and for a moment Rachel thought he might try to force his way past them. But then something changed. His expression softened ever so slightly, as if a part of him finally realized the truth in her words. You really think you can keep him? Beck said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. You think he's just going to stay here with you, like nothing ever happened? Rachel's mind raced. She couldn't let this go on any longer. He's not a tool for you to control anymore. He's a person in his own right. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what you did to him and to others like him. Beck's eyes flicked to the ground, a brief flash of something, perhaps regret, perhaps recognition crossing his face. But it was gone, as quickly as it had appeared. Do you really think you can stop this? Beck asked. You think you can take down a program that's been running for years, that has the full weight of the government behind it? Rachel felt a chill creep up her spine, but she refused to back down. I don't care how powerful you think you are, she said, her voice steady with resolve. The truth is bigger than all of you, and I will expose it. I'll go public with everything I've uncovered. The world will know what you've done. Beck's lips curled into a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. You don't understand, he said. This isn't something you can just expose. This goes deeper than you think. There are forces involved that will stop at nothing to protect this project. If you try to expose us, there will be consequences. Rachel didn't flinch. She knew what he was saying was true. There were powerful people, shadowy figures in the government, who would go to any lengths to cover this up. But Rachel had already made her decision. She would fight for Echo, and she would fight for Owen. They had already been through too much to back down now. I'll take my chances, she said firmly, her eyes never leaving Beck's. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence was thick, the tension palpable. And then, with a final, almost imperceptible nod, Beck took a step back. This isn't over, Rachel, he said quietly. You can't protect him forever. With that, he turned and disappeared into the woods, his figure swallowed by the trees. Echo's body remained tense for a moment, his eyes tracking Beck's every movement, before he relaxed slightly, his posture shifting from defensive to wary. Rachel exhaled a shaky breath, her heart still racing. She hadn't won yet. Not by a long shot, but for now, she had kept Echo safe. And she wasn't about to stop fighting. Rachel didn't sleep that night. The conversation with Colonel Beck kept replaying in her mind, his warning echoing in her thoughts. You can't protect him forever? The words were a chilling reminder of the battle she had just begun. The shadow of Operation Orion still loomed large, and she knew Beck wasn't the only one who would come for Echo. If she was going to protect him, if she was going to expose the truth, she needed to be ready for the war that was coming. But Rachel had never been one to back down from a fight. The next morning, she woke early and went to work. It wasn't just about Echo anymore. It was about every animal who had suffered at the hands of that program. It was about exposing the truth to the world, making sure that no one else would ever go through what Echo had endured. The stakes were high, and Rachel knew it, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had no choice but to take action. The story of Echo was bigger than her, or Owen. It was a symbol of the injustices that needed to be addressed, and she would make sure the world heard it. Rachel's first step was to contact the journalist she had met weeks earlier. She knew that the only way to make a real impact was to go public with Echo's story, and she couldn't do that alone. She needed help from people who could expose the truth on a larger scale. So she sent a message to her contact, telling him everything she had uncovered about Operation Orion, the experiments, and the truth behind Echo's past. She included the photos and documents she had gathered, carefully encrypted to avoid detection. Rachel knew this was risky. If the wrong people intercepted the information, they could make her disappear just as easily as they had erased the records of the dogs involved in the program. But she couldn't worry about that now. She had made a promise to Echo, to Owen, and to herself that she would bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Within hours, her contact responded. "This is bigger than we thought," he wrote. "I'll get in touch with some people who can help us get this out. We'll go public. We'll bring this to the national stage. Stay strong, Rachel. We're in this together." It was the first real sense of hope Rachel had felt in days. Meanwhile, Owen continued to grow closer to Echo. The dog had become more than just a companion to him. He was a lifeline. Echo's presence had filled the void that had existed in Owen's life since his father's death. Slowly but surely, Owen began to open up more. He spoke to Echo, whispering things he'd never said to anyone else. He would laugh at little things again, and occasionally Rachel would catch him smiling as he petted Echo, a fleeting expression of joy that made her heart swell. But Rachel knew that the calm before the storm was about to end. With Colonel Beck's threats still hanging over them, she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The following week, Rachel, Owen, and Echo met with the journalist and his team. They met in a small, dimly lit room in a private office building, far away from prying eyes. It was a place where the world of secrets and investigations converged, a place where the truth could be found and protected from the government's reach. The journalist's team included several key players: a hacker who could decrypt government files, a lawyer who specialized in animal rights, and a former military officer who had once worked on similar projects and had come forward to expose them. Together, they formed a powerful team, each of them bringing a unique skill set to the table. "I think we have enough now to go public," the lawyer said at Weird, looking over the documents Rachel had brought. "But we'll need to release this in stages. Start with a few leaks and build from there. The goal is to create a groundswell of public outrage before the government can get a hold of it." Rachel nodded. "I don't care about the process. I just want people to know what happened. I want to make sure that Echo and all the others get justice." "We'll make it happen," the journalist said, his eyes focused. "But we need to be strategic. The people who are behind Operation Orion won't stop easily. They have the power and resources to bury this if we don't expose them in a way they can't ignore." Big shit. The meeting continued late into the night as they mapped out their plan. Rachel was both nervous and resolute. She had learned so much about Echo's past, and now the stakes had never been higher. They couldn't afford to make a mistake, not when they were up against such a well-funded and well-connected opponent. In the following days, the team worked tirelessly to get the information ready. They leaked key documents to trusted journalists, ensuring they were protected from retaliation. They worked with advocacy groups and animal rights organizations to make sure Echo's story would be heard. And the pressure was mounting, and Rachel could feel the weight of it pressing on her shoulders. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. But as the leaks began to trickle out, the public response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets picked up the story, and before long, the hashtag #JusticeForEcho started trending. Social media erupted with calls for accountability, for the government to come clean about the secret experiments and the abuse that had taken place under the guise of military operations. Rachel watched the news unfold, a mixture of hope and anxiety rising in her chest. She knew this was just the beginning. Echo's story was reaching far beyond the small town where it had started. It was resonating with people across the country, and it was just the tip of the iceberg. As more information was released, more whistleblowers came forward, and the story grew larger with each passing day. But as the pressure mounted, so did the threats. Rachel received multiple anonymous calls, warning her to stop, to take down the posts, to keep quiet before it was too late. She ignored them all. She couldn't stop now. Not when she had come this far. Days turned into weeks, and the media storm continued to grow. Echo's story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the cruelty that could be hidden in the name of national security. More dogs from Operation Orion were located, rescued, and given a chance at a new life, thanks to the work of Rachel and the team of activists and journalists who had taken up their cause. But Rachel knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The government would not relinquish its secrets easily. They would fight back, and they would use every tool at their disposal to silence her. But Rachel wasn't backing down. Not when the world was watching. And as for Echo, he was more than just a survivor. He was a symbol of hope for those who had been silenced, for those who had no voice, and for a world that needed to remember that sometimes the most powerful voices came from the ones who had been silent the longest. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles, media coverage, and public outcry. The story of Echo, the German Shepherd who had been subjected to horrific experiments as part of Operation Orion, had ignited a national movement. The hashtag #JusticeForEcho had become more than just a trend. It had become a rallying cry for activists, animal rights organizations, and anyone who believed that the government's dark secrets needed to be exposed. But as the media storm intensified, so did the pressure from the government to silence Rachel and those who had supported her. Echo's name was now known across the country, and his story had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the government's treatment of animals in the name of national security. But Rachel knew that the battle wasn't just about Echo anymore. It was about holding those in power accountable, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate as Echo and the other animals involved in Operation Orion. One morning, Rachel received a phone call that she had both been expecting and dreading. It was from her lawyer, the one who had been working tirelessly to ensure that Echo's legal rights were upheld. "Rachel, I think we've won," he said, his voice filled with an emotion that Rachel hadn't heard from him before. Echo's case has set a legal precedent. We filed for emergency legal protection for him as a sentient being, and the court has ruled in our favor. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means that Echo and others like him are now recognized as sentient beings. The court has ruled that they have rights, that they can no longer be treated as property or weapons. Echo's survival, his consciousness, his ability to feel pain and emotion, those things matter now. He is free, legally, and no one can take him away again." Rachel felt her knees weaken as the full weight of the decision sank in. This was the victory they had been fighting for. This was the moment she had hoped for. When she first decided to fight for Echo, the court's decision wasn't just a personal victory for Rachel and Owen. It was a victory for all the animals who had been used, abused, and discarded in the name of military experiments. The ruling set a precedent that could change the way animals were treated in the future. Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she thought of all the people who had helped them along the way, from the whistleblowers to the activists, the journalists, and the countless others who had rallied behind Echo's story. They had all come together for one purpose: to ensure that Echo and every creature like him would have a chance at freedom. But the fight was far from over. While the legal victory was monumental, Rachel knew that the fight to dismantle the operations behind Operation Orion was just beginning. The government had been forced to shut down the program, but the people responsible, the ones who had orchestrated the experiments and covered up the truth, still needed to be held accountable. Rachel and the team of journalists continued to expose the full extent of the operation, releasing classified documents and testimonies from former employees who had worked on the project. The media frenzy continued, and as more evidence came to light, the public's anger grew. The government could no longer sweep the issue under the rug. One afternoon, as Rachel sat in her office, reviewing the latest legal documents, she received another unexpected call. It was from the Department of Justice. "We're reopening the investigation into Operation Orion," the voice on the other end said, sounding official but resigned. "We have new evidence, and we're working to bring those responsible to justice." Rachel's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. She had known that this was a long shot, that the wheels of justice turned slowly, but now it seemed that everything was falling into place. The tide had turned, and there was no going back. The investigation led to the arrest of several high-ranking officials who had been involved in the creation and execution of Operation Orion. The scandal rocked the government, and the public outcry was deafening. For the first time in years, it felt like the people had won. Echo's name had not only brought attention to the abuse of animals, but it also exposed the corruption and moral failings within the military-industrial complex. As the investigation unfolded, Rachel and Owen were invited to a public hearing where they were asked to testify about Echo's story. It was a surreal moment for Rachel, standing before a panel of lawmakers speaking out for the rights of animals who had no voice, but it was also a powerful one. It was proof that their fight had mattered, that the countless hours spent organizing, investigating, and fighting for justice had made a real difference. At the hearing, Rachel was asked to share her thoughts on the legal precedent that had been set for animals like Echo. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But this is only the beginning. Echo isn't just a dog. He's a symbol of the many animals who have been used, abused, and silenced by systems of power that don't value their lives. Today, we've made history. But there's still so much more to be done." Owen, sitting beside her, looked up at her with a quiet pride. It was the first time in months that Rachel had seen him speak so openly about his feelings. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but there was something more in them now. Hope, resilience, and an unwavering love for Echo. After the hearing, Rachel and Owen stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching as reporters gathered around them. The media was buzzing, but for Rachel, this moment felt quieter, more personal. Echo was finally free, and justice had been served, not just for him, but for every animal who had been exploited for the sake of power and control. But even as the celebrations began, Rachel knew the work wasn't over. There were still so many other animals out there, so many other victims of Operation Orion, who needed their stories told, who needed their voices heard. The fight for their rights would continue, and Rachel was ready. After all, she had come too far to stop now. As Rachel and Owen drove back to their house, Echo sitting contentedly between them, Rachel looked over at her son. His face was different now, softer, more at peace, and for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt a sense of completion. The journey they had been on, the battles they had fought, had brought them here. Echo had saved Owen, and in return, Rachel had saved Echo. The past would always be with them, but it no longer defined them. They had the future ahead of them, a future where their voices would never be silenced again. The courtroom was packed, filled with reporters, activists, and supporters who had followed the journey of Echo and Rachel from the very beginning. The air buzzed with anticipation, the sense of finality hanging in the air like a thick fog. This was it, the last step in a long, grueling battle to secure Echo's future, and to ensure that the horrors of Operation Orion were finally brought to light. Rachel sat beside Owen in the courtroom, Echo lying calmly at their feet, his presence a testament to the resilience of all those who had fought for him. The dog, once a broken and terrified creature, had become a symbol of strength, hope, and the power of compassion. His once shattered body had healed, and though the scars remained, they were no longer just reminders of the past. They were marks of survival, of victory. The judge, a stern woman who had presided over the case for months, looked down at the papers in front of her. After reviewing the evidence presented by both parties, she said, her voice steady, "And taking into account the significant public outcry surrounding the treatment of Echo and others involved in Operation Orion, this court has ruled that Echo and all animals involved in similar programs are to be granted full legal protection as sentient beings." A wave of relief swept through Rachel as the words sank in. And this wasn't just a victory for her or for Echo. It was a victory for every creature who had been exploited, abused, and ignored by a system that saw them as nothing more than tools. The court's ruling was a monumental step in recognizing the rights of animals, not just as property, but as beings capable of feeling pain, joy, and suffering. The judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud. Echo is now legally free. The government will be required to compensate the survivors of Operation Orion, and any further actions against animals under these programs will be prosecuted under animal rights laws. The room erupted into applause. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached down to pet Echo's fur. His eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw something that had been missing for so long. Peace. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a free being, no longer a tool of manipulation or control. He had fought for his freedom, and he had won. As the applause died down, Rachel stood and approached the judge's bench. Owen followed her, his hand clutching Echo's leash, his face flushed with pride. The judge looked up at them, her expression softening. "You've done something incredible, Miss Jacobs," the judge said, her voice warm. "Not just for Echo, but for all the animals who have been mistreated in the name of science and security. You've given them a voice." Rachel nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I didn't do it alone," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "It was the people who believed in Echo. In justice. We've all fought together." The judge smiled. "And that's why the truth has a way of coming to light, and no matter how hard they try to hide it. Congratulations, Rachel." And with that, Rachel turned back to her seat, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had fought for Echo, for Owen, and for every animal who had been silenced by power and greed. The victory wasn't just legal, it was moral, ethical, and a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be oppressed. As the proceedings came to an end, Rachel and Owen made their way out of the courtroom, the media crowding around them. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Rachel didn't hear them. She was focused on one thing and one thing only: Echo, the dog who had been through hell and back, the dog who had changed her life, and the life of her son. Outside of the courthouse, the sky was overcast, the air cool and crisp. Rachel stood there, taking in the moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. They had won, not just in the eyes of the law, but in their hearts. Echo was free, Owen was healing, and they had made a difference. A reporter approached her, holding a microphone. "Miss Jacobs, now that the case has been resolved, what message do you have for the public?" Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She glanced down at Echo, who was sitting contentedly at Owen's side. His tail wagged softly, as if he knew that his fight was over, that he had found a home, a family, and a purpose beyond anything anyone had ever intended for him. "The message is simple," Rachel said, her voice strong and clear. "Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the ones who were silent the longest. Echo's story is one of survival, but it's also one of redemption. He didn't give up, and neither should we. We owe it to every creature, every being, to ensure they're treated with dignity, respect, and compassion." She paused, looking at the crowd of reporters, then back at her son. "We've all been through a lot, but together we can make a difference. Together we can create a world where no one, human or animal, has to suffer in silence." With that, she took Owen's hand, and the two of them walked toward the car. Echo trotted beside them, his head held high, a look of quiet contentment in his eyes. He had found his place in the world, and now, so had Rachel and Owen. As they drove home, the weight of everything they had endured settled around them like a comforting blanket. Echo, once a symbol of suffering, was now a symbol of hope. He had given Rachel back her son, and in return, she had given him freedom. Together, they had defied the odds. And as Rachel looked at the horizon, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. There was still much work to be done, but now they were no longer alone in their fight. They had each other, and they had the strength of a world that was finally ready to listen. Message. Sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the ones who were silent the longest. As the story came to an end, Rachel knew that they had made history. They had fought for echo, and in doing so, had given voice to the voiceless. And in this new world of justice, compassion, and resilience, no one would ever have to suffer in silence again.